So we're going to be discussing the internal rate of return. And the internal rate of return is also just known as the IRR. So we're just taking the letters there, there, and there when we refer to it. So the IRR. And the idea behind it is it's basically just the expected annual compounded interest of the investment that you are doing. Okay, so it's kind of like just the expected annual compound interest of the investment. And the easiest way to explain this is to go back to that simple example that we used to explain the net present value, where we just had, we invested one set of money and we got one set of returns. And to go from there for the idea. The proposal for investment is invest 11,000 Rand now, and in 3 years' time, get 18,000 Rand return. Alternatively, we could invest it in the bank at 12% per annum effective. Now, when we want to look at the internal rate of return, we are trying to see the approximate or the actual annually compounded interest rate for the investment to get the return that we get from the investment. So in this one, it's going to be a little bit straightforward because we have T0, which is where we invested the 11,000. And then we just went 1, 2, 3 to T3, and we got 18,000 Rand back. So this is a straightforward, compound interest kind of example where we could work out what I is, or what the nominal interest is in this case, compounded annually, or I1, which is what we're actually looking for. We would like to know what I1 is. What is the effective annual effective interest rate? Because that's what the IRR is. The internal rate of return is the annual effective interest rate of the project. So for this example, it's just straightforward. We could use our compound interest formula to work it out. So a reminder about our compound interest formula. It is future values equal to present value, 1 plus IM to the power of n. And we want I1, so we actually want this one to be the subject of the formula. So just a reminder about that. It's future value over present value to the power square root n minus 1. And if you're not sure on how to get there, there is a video that will go through that discussion for you. Alternatively, we could use our financial calculator to do that. And once again, there is videos to go through the compound interest. The first thing we need is, let's write down all the information. So we have our future values equal to 18,000. We have our present values equal to 11,000. We have our N is equal to 3 years. And that's great because we want our M and our N to coincide. And because we're compounding annually, our M is equal to 1. So we already have the fact that they coincide working in our advantage here. And now we have everything we need to go do our working out. So let's use the formula and then I'll go run through the recipe for the financial calculator. But the idea is we want I1. So we say, okay, 3, 18,000, 11,000 minus 1. And that's going to give us, and it's approximately equal to 0.18. If you're using your calculator where you have it rounded off to 2 decimal places, you're going to times it by 100 to get to percentage, and then it's going to give you I1 as approximately equal to 17.84%. And I'm using approximately equal to because I'm rounding off. So we have the internal rate of return of this investment as 17.84%. So before we continue with this discussion, let's quickly just do the recipe for the financial calculator for those of you that are using your financial calculator. So we're just going to move the screen over a little bit. So you would have for your financial calculator, and once again, there are videos that go through this process. You'll have your clearing, which is a standard piece of information that you would do. Then you would enter your compounding periods. So second function, PY1, enter. And we do it this way to match with the work we're going to do later on. So we're going to just get you in the habit of doing it this way. Check our CY. Our CY corresponds. So then we say ONC. Then we enter all our information. So we are getting 18,000 Rand back. So the 18,000 Rand is positive. We invest 11,000. So it is negative in our calculator. Because remember, we have to have inflows and outflows on our calculator. Once again, if you're not comfortable with that, please go look at the video. Then you're going to have your 3N. And you're going to say compute your IY. Now, a reminder, when you do it on your financial calculator, its answer is going to be J in percent. So that's going to be your nominal interest in percent. And we technically want our annual effective interest. In this situation, because our nominal interest that we're coming out with is per annum compounded annually, the J and the I1 kind of just correspond because of the formula when you use the approach. Because remember, J is equal to I1 times 1. So it's going to give you the same answer, but please just recognize that your financial calculator gives you your nominal interest rate. And so we're going to get on our financial calculator also that's 17.84%. And once again, the 17.84%, that's essentially what the internal rate of return is. It's saying that, hey, if we invested the 11,000 and we got the 18,000 Rand out, if we had put this in the bank, they would have quoted us per annum effective of 17.84% per annum effective. That's what they would have quoted us. So that's what the internal rate of return is. It's essentially the project's interest rate if it was annually compounded. Now, it was pretty straightforward to work out in this example, but what if you have an example where you're getting a return of like 5,000 Rand every 2 years and you investing maybe in year 1 and you're investing in year 5. So that's obviously going to complicate it up, and that's where your financial calculator comes in handy. So we have the exact same example that we were just discussing, except now we are going to go through the process of working out the internal rate of return using our financial calculator. So once again, we have invest 11,000 Rand now, and in 3 years get 18,000 Rand return. So the timeline is still important to us. So we have T0, we have an outflow of money of 11,000. Then we have the first year, nothing, second year, nothing. And in third year, we get 18,000 Rand back. Now, for our financial calculator, the nothing years should also be inputted. So by the nothing years, we just put in zeros. So T1 is equal to 0, T2 is equal to 0. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to input this information almost like a data table. So in a process and in an order. So we start with, data set for T0, and we'd actually input the minus 11,000. And then for year 1, we will input 0. For year 2, we'd input 0. And for year 3, we'd input 18,000. So we are going to put this in to the calculator almost like a table of data to do the working outs with. Now, how are we going to put that into our calculator is we're just going to use the enter button. So we would basically, start typing and say plus minus 11,000 and enter. Then we would be like 0 and enter, 0 and enter. Alternatively, and if we've watched the NPV videos, we would have seen this, we could actually enter it as 0xy2, enter. So the xy is telling us, hey, we enter in 0 twice, and then we would have the 18,000 that we would enter. So we will be entering the information exactly like we would for the NPV calculation. So if you haven't looked at the NPV calculations, that may be of interest to you. But the idea is we would, put in all our information in the table. And then we are going to use the cash menu. So we would activate the cash menu by actually, because the cash menu is the the orange on the top of the CFI button, we would have to use second function cash. And then what's really cool is that the rate IY comes up and it says it's equal to 0 at that moment in time. We would just basically say, okay, compute. So we'll ask it to compute the rate IY. And then the answer that it gives us for that rate IY is the IRR. So let's go through the full recipe to remind us how, to input everything on our calculators, including removing the past data. So clearing the memory. So we have that table, and let's go through the recipe. So the first thing we do is have second function CA. Then we're going to say CFI, second function CA. So that's just clearing our information. Then we input everything in our table that we created through our timeline. So the plus minus 11,000 and enter. Then we would enter the 2 zeros. So I'm doing it the short way to get me in the habit of utilizing the short methods. To enter. And then 18,000 and enter. So that's my part 2, putting in my data. So next we're going to activate the menu for the cash flow. A second function CFI, so that we can get to the cash button. Then we're going to see that rate IY shows up on our screen. And it currently says it's equal to 0. Now, when we were doing net present value, we updated this rate IY to the bank's rate IY. Here, we are going to actually ask the calculator to compute it. So you're going to say compute, and it's going to update that rate IY with the internal return rate. So for us, it's going to show it up as 17.84%. And that is going to be our internal return rate, which we will compare to the bank's interest. Now, when we're doing our comparisons to the bank's interest, remember when we looked at investments, we choose the investment that has a higher interest rate because it's going to give us more money in the end. So yeah, the internal return rate is 17.84%. The bank's was, I think, 13. Let's just double check that. Well, it was 12%. So we would choose the investment in this situation because the investment is giving us more money back. So we look at our IRR, and if it is I, which is the bank's interest rate, then we accept the investment or project. Okay, so let's also now just do it on our financial calculator so those of you who are more visual can see, how we type it in. And to do that, I'm just going to move it so that the recipe is quite large next to it so you can actually link the two up. Okay, so we put it into our calculator. So the first thing we want to do is put on our calculator And then we are going to clear all our information. So we're going to say second function CA. Then we're going to say CFI, second function CA. So we've done all the clearing. Next up, we're going to input our data. So that's going to be minus 11,000 and enter. Then we're going to put in 0 twice. So you're going to say 0, comma, and it features twice and enter. So however many times it follows in that regard. Then we're going to get 18,000 Rand back. So 18,000 and enter. And now we're going to open up that cash menu. So remember, we want that cash, which means we go second function, CFI. And then we see the rate IY. And we see with rate IY, it says you can either enter or you can compute. We are going to compute it. So we're going to say compute. And now it gives us the rate as 17.84%. And you can now compare this internal rate of return with the bank's offer, which was 12% per annum effective. And therefore we're like, oh, well, the project's offer of interest is better, so we accept the project or the investment because it's 17.84 over the bank's percentage offer. And that's it. We have the following example, which is consider the following proposal for an investment. Invest 10,000 Rand now, and in 3 years get 16,000 Rand return. The money could be invested in the bank at 18% per annum effective. So what we're going to do is we're going to look for the IRR and compare the IRR with the bank's interest I. So the bank's interest is 18% per annum effective. And when we're comparing our IRR with our bank's interest rate, we are going to be comparing the annual effective interest rate of both. So I1s of both. So in this case, this is already I1. So we sorted on that front. So we already have the I for, our comparison. We're now going to look for the IRR. And what we're going to do is we're first just going to draw our timeline because we need all the data to input into our financial calculator. So it says invest 10,000 Rand now. So we're going to start off with T0 and we're going to minus 10,000 because we invest in it. So we're losing the money for the time period. We don't have it on us. We've given it to whoever is doing the investments. Then in 3 years' time, get 16,000 Rand return. So we have 1, we have 2, and then we have 3. So at T3, we get 16,000 Rand back. Now, for our financial calculator, we need to know information for every time period. So at T1 and at T2, we just going to tell our calculator that nothing's happening. So we're going to put in zeros. Okay, now let's just write down the recipe for our financial calculator because the only information we need for our financial calculator to work out the IRR is this table. So we need nothing else. We do need the bank's effective interest rate, but that's to compare the IRR after our calculator has given it to us. So after our calculator has computed the internal rate of return, we then compare it to the bank's interest rate offer. So let's start our recipe for our financial calculator, and I'm just going to do that so we just see the information we need for it. We always clear our artifacts from our previous calculations. So we're going to have second function, CA, and we're also going to clear our data that we input. So we're going to say CFI, second function, CA. So we're always going to do the clearing of the previous calculations information. Then we're going to just input our data. So we have plus or minus 10,000 and enter. Then we're going to enter 0, but 0 happens twice. So we're going to use a cheat code kind of a way to put it in without saying 0, enter, which is particularly useful if you have a lot more zeros happening or a lot more repeated values happening over an extended period of time. So we say 0, we put in 0, and then we used our data pair button, the X and Y. And we say that the 0 is featuring twice. So what it is and how much it features in a row. And then we say enter. Then we have 16,000 Rand coming out. So we say 16,000 and enter. So we've now inputted all our data. Now we're going to activate our cash flow investment menu by just saying second function, the CFI button, to activate cash. Now on our screens, it's going to say rate IY is equal to 0. And just as long as it displays that, we're just going to push the compute button. And then it's going to give us our internal rate of return. So let's do it on the calculator now. Okay, so we're going to clear our information. So it's CFI second function CA and second function CA. Then we're going to put in our information. So our information is that minus 10,000, enter, 0xy2, enter, because we have 0 twice. Then we have 16,000 and enter. Then we're going to say second function cash, and we want to find out what the IRR is. So we're going to say compute, and it says it's 16.96. So the IRR is 16.96, but the money invested at the bank, its interest for the annual effective interest is 18%. So the project gives us less return on our investments than the bank would. So the bank has that interest of 18%, whereas the project has an interest of 16.96%. So we're going to reject the project and accept the bank. So let's just now write down what we had. So we had the IRR is equal to 16.96%. The bank's interest is 13%. Where did we get? Or 18%. So 18%. And therefore, we have that the IRR is less than the I. Therefore, we reject the investment / project, and we accept the bank because it's going to be a better opportunity for us if we put the money in the bank versus the investment. The IRR